Hey, everybody, and welcome to Brewing with Bud. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Aaron Gore, Vice President of Sales and Marketing for the Fifth Ingredient, Vice President of the American Craft Beer Hall of Fame, and happy to be your host today. But I am joined with three incredible guests, so I couldn't be more excited to be speaking with about the topic of cannabis-based beverages. So, gentlemen, I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourselves. I think on my screen I've got Alec, Jason, and Bob. So, Alec, if you want to kick us off, tell everybody where you're from.
Yeah. So Alex Travis here. Hello, everybody. From North Liberty, Iowa, in the Midwest. I am the co-owner and one of the founders of Field Day Brewing Company and Daydreamer Cannabis. So we are about to celebrate our 2-year anniversary as a brewery, and shortly after opening, began pursuing cannabis beverages. So we were the state's first and only brewery to navigate state and federal laws to start producing and distributing cannabis.
Well, that doesn't sound intimidating and terrifying at all. Jason, how about yourself? Tell everybody where you're from and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Jason Stark here, Chief Commercial Officer of Micellae, Emulsion Technologies, supporting the cannabis beverage and edible space. Coming to you from Miami, Florida, keeping it nice and humid and hot. Been in the cannabis industry for well over 12 years, working in vertical operations, supporting operators with optimizing efficiencies and improving cost of goods, as well as doing product formulation and product creation before partnering with Micellae to bring equipment-free, easy-to-use emulsion technologies for the hemp beverage space.
Well, it's a shame you bring so little technical knowledge to the table. I'm sure we're all going to be struggling through this. Bob, how about yourself? Where are you from, bud?
Hi, I'm Bob Galligan. I am the Director of Government and Industry Relations for the Minnesota Craft Brewers Guild. I was in the actual craft beer industry for about just under a decade and a half. I sat on the board of the Minnesota Craft Brewers Guild for about a year and then joined in 2022. In my role, since I was part of the industry, I interact kind of on behalf of the brewers in Minnesota. But then on the government side, I am the official lobbyist for the majority of the craft brewers in the state, and that includes writing the language in 2023 that allows brewers to operate in hemp. So I come from things from both kind of a brewer standpoint, but also a policy and lobbying standpoint. So.
Absolutely, and you can't really lobby for something until you build some definition behind it. And honestly, I do think that's something that's important to establish up front. You know, we've already talked about the fact we're going to be talking about Cannabev today, and this is beer 30, but we're not talking about beer today. We are talking about Cannabev. We're talking about an entirely different category. So, tell me a little bit, and Jason, maybe we can kick it off with you. How do you define Cannabev? What is that versus just beverages in general, or where do the limits of that start and end versus just hemp or THC, CBG, CBD, CBN? There's a lot of terminology in this. It's novel to people who might be more familiar with beer.
Absolutely. And, it's still something the industry and cannabis as a whole struggles with. If you look at this federally speaking, you've got two very distinct industries separated by the allowable amounts of THC. And that allowable amount is 0.3% THC. You go above that, you go into the licensed cannabis marijuana markets like Colorado, California, Nevada, Florida, Massachusetts, New York, that's regulated on a state by state level. On the other side of the spectrum, items that have been created with 0.3% THC or less by weight are considered hemp. And this is a loose kind of definition. It's a strong definition, but it's loosely translated based on the types of products that have been coming into the hemp space over the better part of the last, since 2018. Per the 2018 Farm Bill, we had these definitions start to come out that allowed operators to begin to create these hemp products. Cannabev is this kind of evolution into where these cannabinoids have made their way into these allowable percentages, where the threshold by weight of 0.3% or less is still the milligram account that's allowable in those products to elicit a euphoric, somewhat high, and sometimes pretty intense high, depending on the number of milligrams that people are targeting. So, what is cannabev? It's kind of one thing is all kind of also all things bev when it comes to cannabinoids and components like that. But what we're looking at is generally THC sodas that are beverages that have come to market that have anywhere from 2.5 to 50 milligrams of THC based on the weight of the product. And yeah, it's pretty much how a lot of these have come to fruition.
So clear as mud, but things you drink that have some degree of cannabinoid in it seems to be the general theme, and I can definitely understand why this has created so much confusion in the space as well. Because I think in beer we're used to things like hard seltzer that people participate in that are relatively simple from a definitional standpoint, but not quite as much to dive into. You mix a puree or flavoring in with a dextrose base, and out comes seltzer. It's more complicated than that, especially doing it clean, doing it well. But conceptually, it's simple, and this is anything but it's not just about the what cannabevs are. It's also about how those interplay with beer, because almost everybody who's dialing in on this, who's watching this at home, including Alec yourself with your own business at Field Day, you also make beer, and you make an alcoholic beverage, and there's some interplay between those two different categories, those two different industries. So, Alec, I'd love to hear from you, and also Bob, from you and your work with the beer industry and the Brewers Guild in Minnesota. How does Cannabev and how does Bev alcohol interface? Do they compete with each other? Are they complementary? Are the customers the same? Are they different? I'd love to hear a little more.
Yeah, I'll kind of touch first, Bob, if you don't mind. So for us, at the end of the day, when we kind of look at it, we're still producing and overseeing a controlled substance between one or the other, right? So they do live in that same format, but we have vast differences between how it's produced, how it's regulated, and then how it's pushed through at least our tap room and our distribution channels. So it kind of falls in line with what your state is able to let you do. But for us, the big push was to try to create these products for new markets, right? For new customers. Going after somebody who isn't a craft beer drinker, but now having a product that they will go after to bring them into our space. And it's obviously just grown exponentially. And now we're distributing a lot more outside of our space. But that was kind of the original thought for us, was to take this new market, this new product, and really bring in a new client into our space.
Yeah, for sure. And I think Alec is 100% right. I also want to say, when we're talking about Cannabev and like how clear it is, I mean, seltzers are also unclear. There's FMBs, which are flavored malt beverages, and then there's also spirit based, and they have very different tax regulations. They have very different. So a lot of people don't realize that, the seltzers that a lot of breweries make are made with malt, and they're regulated differently. So even that has confusion. So we're used to that as craft brewers, which is kind of the reason why we, in 2022, there was regulation that was put into law that allowed us to take advantage of the 2018 hemp bill. So a lot of our members started producing these beverages, and because they started doing it, the onus then became on us as a guild to protect our rights as brewers. In fact, our legislative committee, that's bylaw number 1, is don't lose any rights you're currently granted. So the onus became on us to protect that right. And we went about it as the best way to protect it was to call for regulation. We wanted to see this as a legitimate market. And for once, we actually had the upper hand and the ability to actually craft what that might look like, which is why we did it. When it comes to consumers, I think it's really interesting. I think Alec's right that, you can target a lot of these different consumers. But I also, when you're looking at the numbers, the worry, I think, from a lot of brewers is that this hemp-derived beverage is going to cannibalize and eat away at market share. But the overwhelming people who are drinking hemp-derived beverages also drink beer, and nowadays they also drink spirits, and they also drink they drink pretty much everything. But it's not necessarily them giving it up. But even if it was them giving up that market share, the way we went about it was, well, then let's take that market share. You're not cannibalizing from your consumer if you're providing what they are supposedly cannibalizing from. So we have seen a lot of great overlap in Minnesota. We have seen, especially amongst kind of my demographic, millennials and kind of middle-aged fellas, a new type of consumption pattern of, rather than go out to the bar and have 4 beers with the boys, you'll have 1 or 2 beers and then a hemp beverage and call it a day. And then they can, it's a little easier to wake up for the 8-year-old's T-ball game on Saturday morning. So we have seen a little bit of a shift into that, but we also have on hemp beverage, we've seen, one of the larger demographics right off the bat was like women over 65. Well, that's not your average craft beer drinker. And because we're putting it through a liquor store channel, that person would not traditionally go into a dispensary. So it is this kind of weird intermix that honestly, in a lot of ways, we kind of view as somewhat the future of adult beverage market.
Well, and it was Bart Watson who coined the term omnibibulous to
Yes.
refer to the fact that more and more drinkers drink everything. The average weekly craft beer drinker actually drinks spirits more than they drink craft beer, and that's actually a facet of our success as an industry. As we've grown, we've started reaching a less engaged but much larger audience, and that means that we have to be prepared to address a whole variety of different need states and use occasions. But the real thing that I'm hearing is that not only does this allow us to extend into different use occasions for our own customers who might be looking for different applications, looking for different elements of their own use of some sort of beverage that's going to get them into an altered state, but also reaching some new demographics on the margins. Uh, However, that's obviously a big challenge because one of the chief things, speaking to what you mentioned before, Alec, is the challenges in distribution, the challenges in channel, the challenges in retail. That all comes down to regulation, comes down to the legal side. Now, Bob, I know this is something that you've done extensively, and Jason, obviously, at Micellae, you guys deal with this quite a bit yourselves, but can either or each of you speak a little bit to the legal structure here? Obviously, it's state by state, but what are some of the chief challenges surrounding this on a larger level that some of our viewers might need to keep in mind as they might be exploring cannabis production of their own?
Yeah. I mean, we can roughly talk on the aspect of work in process hemp extracts. And this comes back to the types of cannabinoids that people are using and how to navigate it. Because first and foremost, we have to understand that, at any given point in time, federally speaking, a manufacturer would have to have on hand something that's going to be more than 0.3% THC, because only at point of dilution you start to recognize that the THC concentrations get to a point of compliance. The big aspect that people operate and ship product across state lines that have greater amounts than 0.3% THCs, because anything greater than 0.3% THC is going to be considered a work in process hemp extract. And as a work in process hemp extract, there's no intention for that product to be sold at retail. Therefore, it can be utilized in production with the anticipation of being diluted down so that you do reach a 0.3% or less THC concentration by weight.
Yeah, I would say a lot of the headaches that we have dealt with, like you alluded to, Aaron, is definitely just that it is a state by state basis for people operating. So, a lot of post 2023, a lot of my work has been actually advising different states or different lobbyists as to kind of how we went about things and what language we are using, just because we were the first to kind of codify language on how to regulate this. So it is always, you have to be very wary about what you are able to do from your state specific standpoint. A lot of people who either are producing in Minnesota or who are using Minnesota breweries to produce sell in multiple states, and that is a huge headache from a labeling, a testing, milligram cap. So if you're going to operate in a broad area, you're going to have to operate under very strict, in a lot of ways, much stricter environment. But I do think, one thing that Minnesota strove to do is really equate these hemp beverages to beer. Whereas, higher dose adult use is kind of what we refer to marijuana. We don't use marijuana for problematic historical reasons in the state, but adult use and hemp. And they are regulated very different. In fact, there is language that separates it. So like if we hold a hemp license, we cannot hold a cannabis license because it gets into such a federal area. But, by equating it to beer, because this is low potency, because this is not, I equate it to, if you want adult use, you can go to a dispensary. If you want liquor, you can go to a liquor store. Like they're two different occasions, two different consumers. Because it's low potency, we can move it through liquor stores. And we worked with our liquor stores to make sure that they had that right. This past session, we actually worked and supported with our wholesalers to get a wholesaler's license. Our thing is, we absolutely think that beer wholesalers are very well poised to work in this space, and we are fans of the 3-tier system. It is a wrong system. It's not perfect, and we need to every day come back and try to fix it up a little better. But at the end of the day, it's the best thing that we got, and so we wanted to make sure that we were supporting that channel with the fact of making sure that we weren't just copy and pasting the problems that we have in beer. So that's kind of the path that we took. I think really just kind of trying to mimic the beer pathway is ultimately where we have seen the success of the market.
Yeah, I would say that it's probably in everyone's best interest to absolutely retain counsel and address your state's needs on a state by state basis. I mean, even here in Florida, they just had a recall of a bunch of products that were backstocked because they were like, oh, well, we don't want anything that alludes to children or imagery, and now they're under review. So, if you're navigating, trying to forecast this and work with local lawmakers, you can hopefully get ahead of this and stay abreast of what you need to.
Absolutely. And Bob, and I will say as well, none of this is legal advice.
Yep.
I will say that absolutely up front.
Nope.
We were bringing some expertise. I actually used to run a CBD beverage company myself, as well as being on the advisory board of an upcoming CBD beer. Just as a disclaimer, but please take this purely as guidance. If you're looking at anything formal, please retain counsel. But Bob, you had mentioned labeling before, and Alec, you needing to produce labels for both beer and for THC beverages. I'd love to hear some of the differences that come into labeling requirements. Obviously, with the understanding that this may differ state by state, but is this something that interfaces at the federal level as well? Is this something that the TTB would have an interest in the labeling of, similar to how they do with beer labeling? Can you speak a little to some of the considerations there?
Yeah. So, I mean, for us, like for the beer side, we obviously go all TTB, and that's the space that I've lived in my whole professional life. So that was an easy thing for me, right? When we started to navigate this space, it became vastly different. So, as mentioned before, look around your state and become very familiar with your local space. Are people producing it in your state, or are they just selling it? And if you're interested in that aspect, it's then reaching out to that agency at your state level that oversees that aspect. So for us in Iowa, it's Health and Human Services oversees hemp products in the state of Iowa. So it is working across that channel. So we're overseen by, of course, like the ABD, TTB, Health and Human Services. And then we also are our state inspector for the Health and Human Services for our food manufacturing is the FDA investigator as well. So we have oversight from all of those different channels. For the hemp stuff, we classify, and the state classifies it as a food product. So we follow FDA guidelines, and we use those labeling aspects to a core, but then it is so dependent on the state. So in Iowa, we have a specific label that's for the state because HHS, Health and Human Services, has labeling and warning labels that you have to have for hemp products, while Minnesota has similar but different. Could be a sizing on a image. It could be a simple note that says something specifically about Minnesota. Same thing with Florida. So every state without this federal oversight is a little just kind of a doing their own thing, and that's the hard part. Is if you're moving that distribution outside of your space, it's understanding what each new distribution point is able to do and how you have to do it.
And one of the reasons as well, Bob, I value the work that you've done in Minnesota, helping some other states with their regulatory framework. You actually see this quite often, even when states were first starting getting self-distribution, state guilds being able to offer some of their own regulatory frameworks to neighboring states to make sure they're doing it right. But part of those challenges of regulatory unevenness does mean you have to be prepared to maybe address different challenges as you cross state lines with distribution that may or may not, labels aren't cheap, be something that's actually of value to you trying to expand your business beyond your own state lines. But we've talked a little bit about the legal framework, the regulatory framework, but obviously making hemp-based beverages has to be extremely easy, right? You just go ahead, you do up some seltzer water, and you chuck some THC in. Got to be pretty much that simple. But obviously it's not. You know, for one, THC cannabinoids in general are not water soluble like many of the things that we use in beer are. So, Jason, I'd love to hear a little bit about kind of some of the technical challenges that go into making these cannabev products. And I know at Micellae, that's a huge part of what you even do.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's arguably one of the most important processes of cannabis. And probably the only thing that really distinctly defines it. In the world of cannabis, we deal with emulsions, and that's simply the process of combining oil and water. But we try to do it in such a way that it makes it as stable as possible. Currently, the industry norm is to utilize what's referred to as a nanoemulsion. Nanoemulsions are kinetically stable emulsions that utilize emulsifiers and surfactants in order to create a particle size small enough where it can stay in suspension by the power of the emulsifiers keeping it there. The issue with a lot of different emulsions that are out there has to do with the fact that they're kinetically stable emulsions, right? You require high capex equipment, sophisticated formulations, processes, and time in order to break these particle sizes down small enough and then keep it in suspension so that you don't get coalescence and essentially the oil reforming, creating a slick on top of the water. That's just kind of the tip of the iceberg, right? Keeping the oil and water suspended so that we have shelf stability. Beyond that, we have issues with can liner leaching and scalping, another major component that cannabis manufacturers are facing right now, where they're losing anywhere from 10 to 20%, sometimes higher, of potency to the absorption of cannabinoids into the can liner. The way that people are addressing this is essentially overpitching their cannabinoids to accommodate for that loss so they can target the ideal amounts of milligrams so that their testing comes back within the appropriate range. So after a certain amount of time, you need equilibrium and you can get that level there. Another component is loss at testing. You have potential losses that the testing labs will recognize because they may or may not be able to identify the entirety of all the cannabinoids that are actually present in the material. They're close, but it may be another 3 to 5% of the amount that could have been recognized. So people are able to combat this again with overcompensating, and sometimes you may get half a milligram to a milligram over the label claim that's on the can in order to create what you need. These are a number of components. Then you start moving to juices that have pulp that will crash out and absorb cannabinoids into the pulp. A number of these components. Not only that, but once you get these emulsions on site, you have to keep them refrigerated. They have a shelf life, and you want to get them into solution as soon as possible. It's a nutty world, and keeping oil and water suspended is a bit of a science that we're able to help bring to the table with Micellae.
Yeah, that sounds like an absolute freaking nightmare. Uh, well, obviously, one of the advantages and one of the reasons that we're having this conversation is that for all of the technical challenges, uh, a brew house is inherently an extremely versatile system. There's a reason it's the Minnesota Brewers Guilds, the Brewers Association, not the Minnesota Beer Guild or the Beer Association. These are facilities that are capable of making an enormous range of products, as we've been discovering over these last few years. But uh, Alec, Bob, can you speak a little to some of the unique technical challenges in the brew house? And is there any sort of special equipment or any sort of things that can't necessarily just be repurposed that you have to keep in mind as you're producing cannabis? Alec, how about
Bob,
you?
you want to, okay. Yeah. So, I mean, for us, we were able to kind of essentially repurpose everything we had in house. So at the end of the day, like you said, we're a brewery is a beverage production facility, whether you're making, malt-based seltzers, hop waters, beer. So we're combining ingredients, liquids, raw materials, botanicals, fruits, all of these things to produce this end product. So for us, we're utilizing the same tanks, canning line, pumps, all of that stuff. The big differentiating aspect for us is the process and the procedures and how we're using that equipment. Tied into one, making sure those two products are separated at all times. You never have a crossover. One for regulatory reasons, and two for like health reasons. Gluten allergies, all of those things. These are products that, again, we're following an FDA protocol. You have to have allergen processes in place so there is no contamination. So if you got stuff to make beer, I guarantee you have stuff to make cannabev. It's just understanding the differences of the process for making this, understanding your ingredients, and a lot of research and trial and error, and talking to industry professionals, talking to Bob and Jason and myself about, we've been doing this for a long time. There were 6 months of trial and error that a good chunk of my staff was really enjoying that research and development while we were figuring things out. But if you've got the stuff to make it, to make beer, you can do cannabev. So.
Yeah, I would pretty much echo that. Again, I don't brew anymore, but once upon a time. But we actually did. I mean, very specifically, even put into our law the ability that you could use the same manufacturing space to produce. So brewers could legally, by law, use the same equipment. Yeah, it's pretty much exactly the same, and that was kind of our argument too. Again, when we were kind of making the case for craft brewers taking this up, is who is better poised to produce these beverages. Talking about the headaches of the state by state regulatory aspect, well, that's also kind of our superpower. We are small craft brewers. We are operating state to state. If this was completely federal, the multinational mega brewers would have jumped right in and already taken control. But we have the upper hand for the first time since 1933 or when prohibition was repealed. So I think kind of, we also are used to heavy regulation, but we also are used to food safe food production, shelf stable food production. So that was our argument, was that we are the perfect people to do this. I will say there are some unknowns and headaches. We did pass law that allows for THC on tap. I know a lot of my members are not comfortable doing that, and I advise them, if you're not comfortable doing it, do not goddamn do it. That's kind of the rule across the board. But there are some headaches. I know some people, some brewers are hesitant about emulsion staying in solution. Absolutely, that's a concern. And I told legislators about that concern, but also saying, we are craft brewers. We figured out haze stabilization in like a year and a half. So if anyone is poised to figure this out, it is craft brewers. But we won't be able to do research and development until we know that it's something that will pay off in the end. So there are certain headaches with THC on tap. Does the actual beer line actually scalp the potency of the THC? Does that THC stay in the line? So if you pour beer after it, if somebody gets drug tested, will that be, come up? So there are a whole bunch of things at play that you do have to take into account. But at the end of the day, the process is the same.
The idea of some goat chewing on an aluminum can and getting absolutely messed up is a hilarious image. But speaking about shelf stability a little bit, I would love to hear a little about shelf stability, but also flavor considerations. Do these emulsions typically have a flavor that you have to account for as you're formulating your recipes? And do you have any of the same concerns with shelf stability on the flavor side that may be derived from the actual THC component and not just things like purees and flavorings that breweries might already be familiar with?
Yeah, I'm just happy to jump in here. Yeah, and I want to touch on the fact that brewers right now are in a remarkably powerful position. Not only are they so well fine-tuned with their ability to, use their palate to create products that taste great, but we're also now able to dial in the delivery of cannabinoids paired with that, which, largely the cannabis space has been, well, how many milligrams can I stuff in this thing? Because people are going to buy it and get high anyways. And I think that as this industry evolves, we're going to see product differentiation becoming more and more important. And the tastemakers that have been, dealing with all of this oversight and beaten, battered, and bruised from, navigating all of these compliance areas in alcohol and beer, it's kind of a natural fit because not only are you able to go ahead and manufacture, but you guys are nimble enough and dynamic enough to be able to get customer feedback and pivot towards the flavors that you want and that your customers want. That being said, yes, depending on the type of emulsion and type of cannabinoids and type of product you end up putting in, it's absolutely a component you have to be balancing. I am obviously biased. I think our emulsion tastes great compared to most. But there's a correlation between particle size and recognized flavor. And it's kind of a double-edged sword in that the smaller the particle size, the greater the surface area, the potentially more recognized the perceived bitterness will be. However, the smaller the particle size, the faster the uptake and the more recognized delta 9 THC you are experiencing as a part of your high versus what would eventually become your 11 hydroxy. But then there's a balance. And most of the time, emulsion companies are really out there just trying to get particle size as small as possible to maintain that stability and keeping it where it needs to be. Being able to dial in your dosing and particle size is something that our O2W product can actually do depending on how you load it. But it's absolutely a bittering agent. Emulsifiers and surfactants naturally carry a bittering type of soapiness taste that many people are addressing with bitter blockers or even other flavoring components. I would have to say that beer is a fantastic mask for these bittering agents, and for NA beers to put into a 2.5 milligram product, it's fantastic.
And at some point, we are definitely going to do a webinar on non-alcoholic beer and what you should be doing in your own brewery. Don't make it, just buy Athletic and sell it. That's the very short answer. But we've talked a bit about particle size and the different types of emulsions. We've talked a bit about things like scalping, but all of this really does kind of play into the idea of dosage rate. This is obviously a very different type of product than beer, and most brewers understand ABV extremely well, or at least I hope that they do. That's already a challenge within that side of the industry with people having differential tolerances for alcohol. With something like THC in particular, uh, how do you take into account what a typical dosage should be for the average customer? And how does that play into avoiding overserving? And Alec, I'd really be curious from your standpoint, messaging to a customer that just because the number is lower doesn't necessarily mean the perceived potency will be if the particle size is smaller and that uptake is faster. Like if somebody told me that something was only 2% alcohol, but get me just as drunk just as quickly as something that's 10% alcohol, I'd be pretty skeptical if I saw that sitting on the label.
Yeah. So having the benefit of being able to produce in-house and then bring it straight to our tap room gives us a really good, close, hands-on encounter with the product in real time at a consumer base. So a lot of these products are in, shelf heavy spaces, right? A lot of retail, a lot of cans. So big part of our launch was education to consumers, and then offering options. So we don't have as many strength options now, but when we first started, you could get our like core flavors across a 2.5 milligram, a 7 milligram, and a 15 milligram. And we kind of built it in as a choose your own adventure and really an education piece on what is your experience with cannabis and cannabinoids as a whole. So you get people who come in and they're very familiar with it. They want a 15 right away and they're good to go. We have people who have never done it before and we give them a 2.5 milligram. We say, hey, drink half, hang out for an hour with us, see how you're doing, drink the other half. So it took a long time and a lot of staff education and a lot of consumer education on, I would just say, appropriate consumption. So, Bob mentioned draft. I took a lot of Bob's stuff from just north of us, and, I've implemented a lot of things here at the state level for how we're able to produce things, what we're able to do based off of what he was doing up there. So we were the first and only brewery to launch a draft program in the state of Iowa for draft cannabis. So we have that on all the time, and it comes out as a clear base, and then we're adding in syrups and teas and everything else, and now we have a whole menu off one draft line, 18 different products off one line. So that really allowed us to kind of engage with that person head on and then observe. So like I've now implemented training procedures for our managers where it just like, if somebody takes 6 shots in 30 minutes, manager's going to get flagged, right? A server's going to be like, this person is over consuming. Let's keep an eye on them. What's going on? So we have a similar SOP that we've kind of put in place based off of milligrams consumed, how long that person was here. Are they drinking other things outside of that? And they kind of just get monitored within the space. And like you said, there are some key features and identifiers for overconsumption for alcohol. Cannabis, it's a little bit harder sometimes. So it takes a while, but being very close with your staff and having them pay attention, having them care is extremely important, because for us, we want to make sure that when they come here, people are consuming safely. So it's just kind of monitoring in that same way, but learning while we do it. So.
And I think that's incredible advice across the board. And honestly, lessons that we should be carrying forward to alcohol, even beyond just the cannabis space, staff education, and making sure that you have good processes and your people feel empowered to deny service if someone's clearly had too much. But Bob, one of the challenges that we face with this as an emergent category is the challenge that once these products leave your 4 walls, which they're now out in the field, they're now at retail accounts. How do you ensure that same level of conscientiousness and quality service, and or do you not? And has that represented in Minnesota a liability for breweries, or something that's more of a liability for the bars themselves?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a bunch of challenges. I would say challenge number one is stigma, the still existing stigma, which is fair. I think there's reasons that stigma exists. Part of the reason we purposely put the language for THC on tap is because I think that helps break the stigma. Even seeing somebody just watch it being poured off of a tap, I think kind of relieves them a little bit. Again, because we are craft brewers. We're community driven. No one wants to overserve their neighbor. We tend to take care of those in our tap rooms, and I think that has also people who would normally not try these products feel a little more assured, knowing the face behind the bar, which I think is helpful. I do think that there are a number of challenges for sure. Liability is certainly one of them. If something is out of date, who is held liable? And so, there is no language for that in a lot of states. There is some in Minnesota now. Even a lot of distributor agreements there's no language that says what it has to be. So like you get to argue and make your own and come to terms. One main challenge that we have dealt with up here, especially with on-premise consumption, is insurance. especially because we allow co-consumption, so you can drink beer and THC side by side. I've even approached insurance folks because it's never been done before. Is there language that we can work on to make you feel more comfortable? And the fact of the matter is just we have seen no issues. We have seen no major accidents. We have seen no fatalities. We have no idea how much it would cost were it to happen. It's a great problem to have. But at the end of the day, no one knows exactly how to cover if something were to happen. So again, everything is so new, and a lot of it is just kind of supply and demand. I have to tell my members pretty consistently that, insurance providers, but then also, wholesalers and everyone, a lot of these businesses, they use 1,000-page spreadsheets to actually of data to operate and write their policies. And we are that data that they are collecting right now because it's never been done. So I think it's part of the headache that just comes with a new and emerging market. But again, I think a lot of the stigma is slowly being chipped away because we have seen great benefit with zero downside. So.
Yeah, let's put an asterisk on zero just for legal purposes while we're on the call.
Yes.
But we're talking about messaging and communication with customers on proper use, communication with retail customers of our own on proper use. But messaging does go beyond that because messaging is also about how you're communicating these products themselves to the customer, and branding, labeling, that obviously plays a big role. Alec, I know that Field Day Brewing has kept its beer and its Cannabev products under separate brand hierarchies. You have Daydreamer, which is treated as its own entire category. And obviously, Jason, Bob, with yourselves, you've worked with multiple brands that have handled that brand architecture in a couple of different ways. So, Alec, I'll kick it off to you, but I'd love to hear from everybody some of the advantages and disadvantages of running these under your brewery's header versus running these under their own brand where it may be communicated a little differently than your beer is.
Yeah. So I think it really, million ways to do it, but it depends on the channels that you want to follow. So for us, we started this as a tap room growth model, bringing new people in, and now we're multi-state distribution, and we've grown heavily outside of Field Day Brewing Company. My main goal was to get to that point. Who knew it was going to happen? But with the products being so new in the state of Iowa, I also wanted a level of separation and safety from the business that we already had intact. So if something came down the line and regulation came through, I didn't want Field Day to be hurt, affected, or brought down from the aspects of Daydreamer. So there was a safety and separation point there. And for us, a lot of it was just trying to keep them a little bit different, keep the beer after those craft beer drinkers, right? Iowa is notoriously like 5 years behind every single trend in the world. So we didn't have a lot of options here at the time. So it was really kind of just trying to get people used to it outside of the Field Day part. So we were trying to do enough for Field Day and get the name out there. And for us, it justified the safety and the resources and new consumer base off of a whole new product, whole new branding outside of people who are going to be looking at Field Day as a craft brewery. So we get both, right? We get people who come to a Field Day and we're marketing to them as a brewery, and they also see Daydreamer. But now we have marketing options and we have components and levers we can pull that are outside of the craft beer network that is bringing somebody else in. Kind of just from my perspective, that was kind of my main push for that.
That was the smoothest turn off of a phone I think I've ever seen on one of these, by the way.
Thank you.
Barely noticeable.
Yeah.
Jason, Bob, I'd love to hear some perspective from y'all on that as well.
Yeah, Alec just nailed it on the head and was really good. I see it from a number of different industries. You see MSOs doing like sub brands and then licensing the rights to use brand names.
Can you speak to what an MSO is, just for anybody else?
Yeah, multi-state operator within the licensed cannabis space that are now double dipping, so to speak, into both hemp beverage as well as licensed cannabis operations. And it's not uncommon to see that because they're seeing the trend, they're seeing the buzz and getting that going.
See what you did there. That was clever. Seeing the buzz.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's really about risk mitigation and what your perceived gains versus risks are. Obviously, by tying something back to your existing brand, you get to tap into existing market share and get to ride that familiarity and trust that your consumer base has been able to tie back to you and to the brand equity you've been able to create. Um, and yeah, I think it's really going to be dependent on a state by state and business by business case to determine how you want to be associated with this. Because depending on if you're going to be focusing on national sales versus local state sales, and you're in a fairly conservative state, and that stigma is holding true, then maybe you want to differentiate, maybe not tie that back to the existing model so that your existing revenue doesn't get affected.
Bob, anything to add there?
Yeah, no, I think that that's exactly right. I will say, I think also there is a little bit on for some of my members excitement again on building a new brand, the ability to kind of like step away from the brewery that you have been operating and been subject to for a decade for some of these folks. All of a sudden, it's a new project, which I think kind of lights a little bit of a fire for some of these folks, and I think that's great because they also then bring that back to their brewery in a lot of ways that I've seen. So, but at the end of the day, as I tell folks, my job is to give you the options to run your business, not tell you how to run your business. So it is going to be different for literally everybody.
Absolutely. Now, we were talking about dosage rates a bit earlier, and that really kind of I think, Jason, you were the one who mentioned use occasions originally on that, but one of the challenges is that the way people use Cannabev is significantly different from the way people use flower, for example, when they're smoking cannabis. And I do think part of that it was responsible for that race to maximize the actual dosage rates initially, because that in general potency and the least number of blunts you have to smoke to get you there. That was a huge concern for people when they're talking about smoking versus in the cannabis space, where it's quickly become apparent people want to session these at a similar pace rate and in similar settings that they are used to with alcohol. But can each of you speak a little bit to some of the trends that you see driving Cannabev now and some of the ones you kind of see on the horizon?
Absolutely. You know, dosing is a very important component right now, and like you said, particle size, stability, and consistency is key. Maintaining consistent testing of everything that you're manufacturing to ensure that you are being able to deliver a consistent product to your consumer base. We're just coming off the Hemp Beverage Expo, which occurred last week, 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. And one of the cool things they were able to do with Skull Brewing was do a hemp bev takeover of the entire bar. And there were about 40 something brands represented that you can go and order at the bar. And one of the biggest takeaways is that for a bunch of industry leaders and operators, the most purchased beverages or consumed beverages were lower milligrams for the sessionability, which is certainly becoming a major term in hemp bev, especially on the Hill, to kind of draw the parallels between how people can session cannabis-based beverages and hemp beverages as how they compare to traditional edibles. I'm sure that many consumers at this point have probably had a poor experience with homemade edibles in the past where no one knows the dosing. You eat that thing and 45 minutes later you don't really feel anything. You have your second serving and next thing you know, you're on a 24-hour ride and you've got a 24-hour hangover to follow, that you're just in a cloud. Hemp beverage and these emulsified products actually bypass a lot of that because you're absorbing this lymphatically, sublingually and throughout your GI tract, and you're recognizing this delta 9 THC crossing the blood-brain barrier. What this means is that you're getting anywhere from a 5 to 30-minute onset with these THC sodas. You're recognizing the actual high very quickly, but then because of the particle size and early recognition, you're also seeing a fast outset. So, some people come down off of this high between 1 and 3 hours, and that gives people to kind of session that that beer and keep their level elevated while still being able to maintain control. And then, switching to water after your last beverage for an hour or so could, potentially lead to, being able to operate a vehicle and not have to worry about, feeling too inebriated, which is one of the biggest upsides to these nano emulsified and micro emulsified products that are coming to market.
Alec, how about you? What are some of the trends that you see coming in the hemp beverage space? Some of the things that you see on the horizon?
Yeah, so kind of jumping on that same ship that Jason's touching on there. So, when we started, right, we had three different strengths, a 2, a 7, 15, to kind of navigate the space, learn it, and then get people educated. Because of Iowa laws, now we're across the board at 4 milligrams in all 12-ounce cans. And then outside of the state, we offer 5 and 10 milligram options across the flavors. So for us, that's kind of how I see the dosage moving forward in a like a properly regulated space. It's a milligrams that people are familiar with, is that nice clean 5 and 10. Sessionability is huge. We're looking to partner with different events and concerts and all this, and you've mentioned cannibalizing bar and doing all these things. That is a worry. If you give somebody a 50 milligram can, I mean, shit, they're done for, right? At least I would be. I know people who could handle it, but I'm on the floor. The idea is that I am engaging with these, and so are our consumers, on a social basis. If they're not taking them home and enjoying them in their own space, they're going to come out and they're going to want to have that same social experience as if they were having 2 or 3 beers with a friend, but they're having 2 or 3 of those low dose seltzers in that same format to engage in that social outside experience. So for me, the low dose is what I prefer, and that's how we see consumers go. But it's so market dependent. It's state to state. It's distributor. When we work with our distributor in Illinois, they have sections. They're like, we need to have twice as much 10 milligrams in this part of the state compared to this side of the state, because that's all they're drinking. Versus these guys are going through 5 milligrams in the suburbs over here. So for me, it's consumer base, but low milligram for me, I think as I look forward, will be the winner.
Absolutely. And Jason, you had your hand up. Apparently something you're able to do. I didn't even realize was possible during these webinars.
That's fluency. Yeah, and I think that we're just beginning to scratch the surface. We're penetrating markets, we're identifying consumer preferences. The consumer base is growing every day. And the market's becoming more and more competitive with number of brands hitting the market. Forecasting what trends to identify for product differentiation is going to be absolutely key. And one of the first things that always starts to follow is cannabinoid blends, ratios. CBD, THC, CBC, CBG, and CBN are the major 5 that are tested for. They all elicit, somewhat different effects and could be utilized. But I think, again, coming back to the brewers of America and having the opportunity to really lean on those palates, I think it's going to become more and more important that, if people are going to session these, they don't want to session something they're going to cringe at every time they take a sip, but they're going to be desiring specific effects and, something that's tastes good going down. So I think it's continue to monitor that product differentiation, these ratios that are going to start to come down, being dynamic and flexible at the production and R&D side, being able to execute quickly, which honestly, everyone that's doing in-house manufacturing has the fluency to do.
So we've mentioned Hemp Beverage Expo, and obviously, Bob, we have you on here from Minnesota Brewers Guild. Here in the beer industry, we're so used to the culture of the industry driving so much of what happens within it, so many of the touch points for expertise and for development and for collaboration. No other industry has nearly the kind of dynamics that craft beer has, but there are still groups and there are still avenues to do outreach for. Bob, do you have any sort of recommendations for people who are looking to get more into this space, kind of shared resources or places that they should be looking, whether it's for collaboration, advice, or expertise?
Yeah, I mean, if you're really interested, I mean, one, again, get to know your state, get to know if other breweries are operating and producing these, for sure. Depending on your state, your guild might be a champion of these. They might not. There are plenty of states that have kept their distance, and that's totally fine. Having said that, there are plenty of guilds who have followed our lead and that I'm in close contact with pretty consistently. But other than that, I would say, you know, the Hemp Beverage Alliance is super, super good. I think that's definitely the biggest and kind of most legitimate, also most welcoming. It is kind of the closest thing I think that we have to almost a Brewers Association of, you know, if you do have questions, there are people there who will answer it. There are different Slack channels for states. There are different Slack channels for different issues. So I think they've done a really, really good job. I've been a member of that for quite some time. I'm really impressed with what Chris and the crew has put together, and there's a lot of expertise in that group.
Fantastic. Well, thank you everybody for being on here. I appreciate your expertise so much. Appreciate you being able to share the time. Thank you everybody who came on live to watch this, and everybody who may be watching this after the fact on our YouTube channel. It's been absolutely stellar. And everybody, keep an eye out as well for next month when we are going to be doing a webinar on brew distilleries. You know, another thing that's hot on people's minds, combining distilled spirits operations with a brewery, some of the considerations you need on that front as well. Cheers, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks, Al.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.